Hello, welcome and welcome back to my channel. My name is Verenia, and in today's video I want to talk about things that you may want to think about doing with your money when prices are currently rising. So obviously, since inflation has been increasing even more and things are becoming a bit more expensive, what I really want to do is talk through some of the things that I'm currently doing with my money and that I think you should potentially think about doing to really make sure that you can still have your finances in check even when things are actually rising. So the first tip I would give when it comes to really handling your money whilst prices are increasing is to actually do a financial audit. Now you might be asking, what on earth is a financial audit? Well, what I mean is that you really want to be able to understand exactly what is coming in versus what is coming out, so you can actually make some calculated decisions and evaluate whether you may want to get rid of things or actually keep them. Now, the reason why I decided to make this point is because many people tend to actually miss this step. So when I'm specifically talking about a financial audit, what I'm saying is that you really want to be clear on what your expenses are. Where is your money actually going? How much money are you putting towards your savings and investments versus how much is going towards your essential bills and how much is going to things like your sinking funds, if you have any, or your general spending. Now, the reason why this is important is because if you're able to actually do an audit on your finances and really be clear on where your money has actually been going, it's going to be easier for you to evaluate whether there are some things that you may want to get rid of if they're not serving you any purpose. And what that means is that you can then use that money to pay for things that may have increased in prices. So for example, let's say that petrol prices have been increasing, but you find that you actually need to be able to pay for that petrol in order for you to get to work. Well, what you can do is, if you conduct a financial audit, you can literally list out all of your expenses and see which ones you potentially could maybe get rid of if they're not serving you anything. So for example, if you're maybe subscribed to a service that you literally have not been using for the past year, what you could essentially do is decide to actually get rid of that expense so that you can use the money that you were already paying for that subscription towards your petrol. And so what this means is that you won't necessarily need to completely change your lifestyle. So you wouldn't need to drastically change your lifestyle, but what you'd really be doing is thinking about what you actually value more. So if there are certain things that you're paying for and you don't really value it, or it's not really serving you any purpose, well then you could potentially get rid of that and use that money for something that's going to be a bit more important. Now, if doing a financial audit maybe sounds good to you and you want to learn a bit more about how you can actually manage your money so that even though prices may be increasing, you're still able to keep your finances in check, then definitely check out my free training, because what I do is essentially just outline the steps that you could potentially take to really make sure that you're not only able to manage that money, but also grow that money through investing so that you can also beat inflation at the same time. So definitely check out that free training if you haven't already. I will link more information up here for you and in the description below. But essentially, doing a financial audit and knowing exactly where your money has been going can be really helpful, because that's going to allow you to actually take action and think about things that you could potentially change in order for you to save a bit of money so that you can basically use it for those expenses that have already increased. So the next tip I want to give when it comes to prices increasing and inflation in general is to actually know your numbers. Now, when I'm specifically talking about knowing your numbers, what I essentially mean is this is going to help you, especially when it comes to budgeting. Now, one massive problem I see is, particularly when it comes to people and their budgets, they don't actually know their numbers. And what I mean by this is they don't actually know the total cost of every expense that is coming out of their bank accounts. Now, why that's a problem is because if you aren't really sure about the numbers, or you're not actually clear on the total cost, what that means is that you don't know exactly how much is going to be coming out of your bank account every single month or every week. And so it's going to be very difficult to tell your money what to do if you have no idea how much your expenses actually come to. And so if you're really able to be clear on your numbers and you know exactly what is happening with your money, it's going to be much easier for you to have a more realistic budget. And so what that means is that you can use the budget to really plan in advance, and that's really going to help you figure out what you should be prioritizing. So as an example, a few months ago, petrol prices had really been increasing, and that was obviously impacting the amount we would end up spending on petrol. But why knowing our numbers was so important was because we were then able to plan for things in advance. And so we were able to say, okay, if petrol prices continue to increase at this rate, and if this is going to be the cost of petrol, this is how much we're actually going to set as a budget for our petrol. And that's also going to impact how much we actually set as a budget for everything else. And so we were then able to evaluate if there were maybe things that we may need to change, because we basically knew the numbers for pretty much everything. Now, if you've never really been budgeting properly, or you haven't just been very consistent with budgeting and need more help with that, then don't worry, because Auntie V is always here for you. So I do have many budgeting videos that will really help you get started if that's something that you want to do. So definitely check out those videos if you haven't already. I will link one up here for you and in the description below. But essentially, the clearer you are when it comes to actually knowing your numbers and understanding exactly how much your expenses cost, the easier it's going to be for you to now start thinking about what you may want to prioritize going forwards. Now, the next thing I want to talk about when it comes to prices increasing is to actually see if you can find some alternatives when it comes to some of your expenses. So what I mean by this is there may be some expenses where actually if you're able to find an alternative, you're still able to enjoy the product or service but at a fraction of the cost. So for example, this could be where you actually shop for groceries. So in my case, we have found that actually shopping in supermarkets such as Lidl and Aldi can be considerably cheaper than other supermarkets but still have similar quality. And so what that means is that we're still able to buy a decent amount of food, but it's going to end up being a lot more cheaper compared to actually shopping at other supermarkets. Now, obviously, when it comes to things like groceries, there are going to be different factors involved that actually impact how much you may end up spending. For example, you could have different food intolerances. Your location could also impact what supermarkets you live near as well. There may be certain things that you end up buying that may not actually be at that particular store. For example, in our case, sometimes they don't actually have some of the food we like in Aldi, so we may end up having to go to another supermarket. But what I'm saying is that let's say you've done your financial audit, you may find that with some of your expenses, you could potentially find some alternatives for. Another example is myself when it came to a gym membership. Recently, my gym membership expired and the deal that I had actually used is no longer available. And so what I decided to do was see any other alternatives and find out what worked best for me. And so what I actually found is that if I chose to go to the gym during off-peak hours, so basically just not after the working time, so I think between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m, if I was able to avoid those hours, then my gym membership could still be considerably cheaper compared to if I actually bought a membership that was based on peak hours. And so what I decided to do is just buy the membership with off-peak hours, mainly because I never really go to the gym during peak hours anyway. So honestly, it just made no difference to me. But what it meant is that I was potentially going to save around £100, which is maybe around $135 over the year, just from actually picking an alternative and choosing that particular membership. So again, once you've done your financial audit, maybe use that time to see if you can find any alternatives where you could actually end up saving money and using that money to actually pay for other things that may have increased in price. Now, the next tip I want to give when it comes to prices rising or inflation is to actually consider asking your work to give you a pay rise. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this point is because if you know that prices are increasing, let's say they're increasing by 5% year on year these days, well, what that means is if your wages have not increased with those prices, you are going to end up becoming poorer over time. And so what I'm saying is that you could consider actually asking your work for a pay rise to make sure that your wage at least keeps in line with inflation. Now, if you find that maybe your employer is just not prepared to give you a pay rise or anything like that, then it may be worth actually changing jobs and just making sure that when you actually apply for new jobs, that you are actually asking for a higher salary than you currently earn, just to make sure that you are still able to keep up with inflation. Plus, at the moment, with things like the Great Resignation going on, a lot of employers are looking for that top talent, and they're probably going to be willing to pay a lot of money in order for them to find that talent. And so if you're someone that has actually got a lot of these skills that these employers are looking for, you could potentially use that to your advantage and not be afraid to actually ask for more money, particularly because of the way inflation has been going. Now, if you do want to learn more tips about how you can maybe increase your income, I do have a video that talks about that in a bit more detail, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. I will of course link that up here for you and in the description below. But for someone who used to work in HR, and I also used to work in recruitment as well, I would definitely encourage you to ask for more money if you can, because the worst thing that they can say is no, and at least that means you actually have options and you can now start to figure out what you want to do next. Now, the next tip I want to give when it comes to actually dealing with your money whilst prices are increasing is to really start looking out for deals when it comes to some of your expenses. So as an example, I hardly ever auto renew my insurance because usually what happens is that these providers are likely to give better deals to new customers because they want to attract new customers. And so what they'll essentially do is that if you decide to just auto renew with them and you don't bother shopping around, they could essentially just hike up the prices knowing that you're probably not going to be bothered to actually start looking around for other deals. And so you're going to end up paying that premium price. So for big expenses, like maybe it's your utility bills, maybe it's car insurance, whatever it is, by using things like comparison sites, that's going to allow you to shop around and see what other providers are offering, and then making that decision based on your personal circumstances. And I would definitely say that this can be really, really useful, particularly at the time that we're at. So if prices keep increasing, and particularly if you find that your bills are increasing, you want to at least make sure that you are getting the best deal out there. Now, the next tip I want to give when it comes to dealing with your money whilst prices are rising is to use the power of sinking funds. Now, if you have no idea what sinking funds are, they're basically planned expenses that you can use to save up for over time, so that when it comes to the time for you to pay for that expense, you already have money set aside for it. Now, the reason why I wanted to make this point is because if you're able to create those sinking funds and you're able to pre-plan those expenses, what it essentially means is that you're going to have peace of mind knowing that you already have money set aside for certain expenses that may need to be paid for. And so if prices do continue to increase, you at least know that even if things change, you still have some money to actually pay for those expenses, particularly if these are expenses that you're actually going to need to pay for whether you like it or not. So as an example, I'm going to feel much better knowing that I have money set aside for car insurance, or maybe it's my TV license or anything like that. As long as I know that I have money set aside for it, even if things change, I at least know that I'm still going to be able to drive my car. So all I'm saying is don't underestimate the power of sinking funds, because this could really help you out, especially if your circumstances change. Now, if you do feel like you may need further support, whether it comes to actually creating those sinking funds or actually understanding how to complete your financial audit or make a budget that really works for you where you don't feel so restricted, then definitely check out my one-to-one coaching program, because essentially what I'll do is really help you uncover all of those things so that you're still able to save money even if prices are still increasing. So if you haven't checked that out yet, you can definitely book a free call with me. I will link more information up here for you and in the description below. So if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what are some other tips you would give when it comes to prices rising. I do post every Tuesday and Friday, so if you would like to know more, then of course you can subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.